story is told about a man who lived many centuries ago along the northern frontier of China. One day, for no apparent reason, one of his horses ran away. And when the people in the village heard about that, they gathered around the man and offered him their sympathy. But the man said to them, "How can you be so sure that this isn't a blessing?" Well, sometime later, his horse returned and brought with it 2 wild stallions. But when the people of the village heard about that, they congratulated the man about his good fortune. But the man said, "How can you be so sure this isn't a curse?" A few days later, the man's son decided to try to ride one of the wild stallions, but the stallion threw him off, and the boy broke his hip and wasn't able to walk. Again, the people of the village gathered around the man and offered their sympathy. But he said to them, "How can you be so sure this isn't a blessing?" Well, a year later, war broke out in that region, and the army drafted all the young men in that village, except for that man's son, because he still wasn't able to walk. Those young men went off into battle, and they were all killed. Our lives seem to be filled with highs and with lows. Our lives seem to be filled with those moments when we feel that we've been blessed, and those moments when we feel that we've been cursed. But the good news is that throughout all the ups and downs of our lives, God is able to bend and shape each of those moments into something that is ultimately good. That's one of the major lessons we learn from these stories about Joseph that we find in the book of Genesis. In fact, you could really say that the story about Joseph is one long series of ups and downs. As a young person, Joseph certainly started out in life on the upside. Although he was the 11th of Jacob's 12 sons, by far he was his father's favorite. And his father didn't hesitate to show his favoritism, giving to Joseph that special garment that he wore, what we often call the coat of many colors, or as the Broadway musical about Joseph called it, the amazing Technicolor dream coat. Well, as you might well imagine, Joseph's brothers didn't very much like the special treatment he received from their father. And so that eventually brought Joseph to the first down time in his life. One day his brothers got together and plotted against him, and they took Joseph and threw him down into a pit. And they were debating whether to kill him there in the pit or just to leave him there to die on his own. But then at the last moment, another option presented itself. A caravan of traders was passing by. And so the brothers lifted Joseph out of the pit and sold him to those traders as a slave for 20 pieces of silver. But before Joseph left, his brothers stripped him of that special robe, dipped it in animal blood, and took it back to their father and said, "Bad news, Father. It looks like Joseph has been killed. He must have been mauled by some wild animal." But for Joseph, that low point soon turned into a high point when that caravan took him down into Egypt and they sold him to a man named Potiphar, who was the captain of the Pharaoh's guard. And very quickly, Potiphar recognized how wise and gifted Joseph was, and he promoted Joseph to be the overseer of his entire household. But that time of being up quickly turned into a downtime again for Joseph, when Mrs. Potiphar fell in love with him. But even though Joseph kept turning away her advances and told her that he would never fool around with the wife of his master, Mrs. Potiphar then turned the tables on Joseph and went to her husband and accused him of coming on to her. And so Potiphar had Joseph arrested and thrown into prison. But even during that low time of prison, Joseph found that very quickly he was back up again. Because there in prison, he was impressing the other inmates and the guards with his ability to interpret the meaning of dreams. And so very soon he was recruited to be an advisor to the Pharaoh himself. And Joseph distinguished himself when he was able to interpret for Pharaoh one of his dreams that none of his other advisors were able to make heads or tails of. In that dream, the Pharaoh saw 7 big, fat cows coming out of the Nile River. Then, right after them, came 7 thin, ugly cows, which proceeded to devour the big, fat cows. And Joseph explained that what that dream meant was that in Egypt there would be 7 plentiful years of harvest, followed by 7 years of famine. And so, because of his insight, Pharaoh appointed Joseph to be his second in command and commissioned him to start gathering up and storing food during those years of plenty so that the people in Egypt would still be able to eat during those years of famine. Well, it was during those years of famine, during that downtime, that Joseph's brothers, the ones who years before had sold him as a slave, came to Egypt in search of food. At first, when they approached Joseph and attempted to make a bargain so that they and their families would be able to survive, they didn't recognize him. They didn't realize that it was Joseph. They didn't realize that the one who was saving their lives by giving them food was none other than the brother that they had treated so miserably years before. And so here in this story that we heard this morning, Joseph comes forward and tells his brothers who he is. That he is Joseph, their brother, who is now the second most powerful person in all of Egypt. And for a moment, the brothers feel a time of being up, thrilled at the prospect that their brother is in a position to save their lives. But then that up moment quickly turns into a down moment when they start to dread what kind of revenge Joseph might plot against them for all the evil they had done to him in the past. But Joseph stuns his brothers when he tells them that he doesn't have any hard feelings against them. In fact, Joseph even goes so far as to say, "It was not you who sent me here to Egypt, but it was God." In other words, Joseph